I've got a paper, but I'm going to talk to the paper. So if I can go through this, you've got an idea there of my conference themes, picked from the overall conference themes. And when I was thinking about this paper, I'm very conscious of the fact that COVID-19 has produced a great deal of media coverage, which has looked at school shutdowns and the way in which teachers have been required to come up with teaching materials both online and hard copy for their students. Now, my thought of high hopes comes with, and I was once told, give your papers much more pop, Marisa, so I tend to go to the Great American Songbook, and in this particular instance, I'm looking at the song Hole in the Head, or High Hopes from Hole in the Head, and I'm getting my mouse down here right now. So when you're found with your chin on the ground, there's a lot to be learned, so look around. And the question that springs to mind is, the pandemic has prompted teachers to produce material, but that makes us think about other circumstances in which teachers were producing material. And if we go back into the 19th century in Australia, what prompts that? And I'm trying to find my mouse. Here we go. Well, and that brings us to school textbooks. And most notably, I'm going to focus on one, which was the English Grammar with Exercises by Mrs. Charles A. Murphy, published in Colonial, Adelaide in 1878. Front cover and the opening pages there. Now, Sophia Jane Murphy, or Mrs. Charles A. Murphy, is now better known on databases as a colonial artist. When she died in 1884, she received the rare tribute of an obituary in the Adelaide Press. Very rare for women to receive obituaries. It helped, of course, that her husband, Charles A. Murphy, was actually a newspaperman, and that obituary was published in one of the papers where he was one of the leading lights, the Lantern. In essence, the publication of that obituary was even more remarkable because Sapphire had slipped out of public view for a few years because she had concentrated on bringing up her very young children. But she is not unique in the sense that there were a significant number of teacher authors in colonial Adelaide. Now, that in itself might seem rather remarkable. There's my mouse. Why Adelaide? It's a smaller colonial town than Melbourne and Sydney. And colonial South Australia went through a really uncertain economic cycle of boom and bust. Why do we find teacher authors in Adelaide? A significant number of them never published school textbooks or never wrote school textbooks. They wrote fiction, they wrote non-fiction, or they went into journalism. And that ranged from William Anderson Cawthorne, known to a great many, and particularly through Rick Hosking's excellent work, through to women authors such as Catherine Martin and Ellen Liston, people covered in the research produced by Margaret Allen and Kay Whitehead. To some extent, the reasons for these teacher authors springing up in Adelaide, even with all these uncertainties, lie in two factors, which I'll quickly sketch through. You see there on the screen a photograph of the South Australian Institute building, which is now incorporated into the State Library of South Australia. And I'm using that as an image to prompt or promote the fact that South Australia founded as a colony without convicts in 1836, is often regarded, and in fact usually noted in some cultural histories of early South Australia, as being regarded by early colonists not so much as a colony of South Australia, but more as a province of England, somewhat removed. And there is a perpetual undercurrent in both newspapers and official documents that South Australia really wanted to promote its cultural superiority to the rest of Australia, because it was a way of preventing South Australia declining into the sort of social depravities, or what was perceived in Adelaide as the social depravities, of particularly Eastern Australian colonies that had been founded with convicts. So you've got one of the reasons possibly why you've got so many teacher authors, or this significant cluster of teacher authors arising in Adelaide, is that you've got a tight-knit cultural base with cultural circles, many of which were based around the foundation of the South Australian Institute. Because not only was there a library within that building, but, for example, a School of Art, and that School of Art is the foundation institution for the University of South Australia, a Society of Arts, which was founded in 1856, so there were art exhibitions, and of course the South Australian Museum. Now, once again, my mouse has gone from me. Okay, so you've got these tight-knit cultural circles eager to show themselves more as a province of England. There's a cultural edge to all of this, a commercial edge to all of this, in that you've got the development of a book-selling trade, and the booksellers in Adelaide were forced into a situation through this boom-bust economy of being extremely flexible and able to go in all sorts of directions. So Platt's news agency on the left-hand side, he was a stationer, he was a bookseller, he sold homeopathic medicines, he was involved in printing books as well. Rigby on the right, well, of course, this went right into the 20th century, and Rigby's became a prominent publisher of educational texts. So you've got those two factors. You've also got the development of a very precarious and very competitive educational market. And Sophia Jane Thwaites, as she was before she married Charles Andrew Murphy, came to Adelaide and embarked upon what could be best described as one of the great high wire acts for women in education in South Australia. Now, a little of her background. She was in fact the daughter of W.W. Thwaites, the artist photographer. Her mother, Jane McLean, was also a teacher, although really you don't get much written evidence of that until late in the 1870s, when her mother was setting up a school to the north of Adelaide in the Gawler region. Sophia Jane was born in 1845 in Sydney. The family were peripatetic. Father moved, was an artist, then got into photography, moved the entire family down to Hobart, and then they moved from Hobart to Adelaide. The men in the family who were photographers, father, son, W.W. Thwaites Sr. and Hector, kept moving around, but would then come back into Adelaide and South Australia. Sophia Jane is different. She enters into the education market before 1875. In fact, she purchased a school from a Miss Bird by about 1869 in Kent Town, slightly to the northeast of Adelaide. That is the first image, Ladies College, Kent Town. It's also known as Grove House. It is a private venture school. In other words, a school set up, but it's a private business. Now, this is the other reason for teacher authors emerging in Adelaide. It is highly competitive to be a teacher in Adelaide. You've got private venture teachers. You've got teachers who attempt to take a government licence, and unlike some other colonies, South Australia, with its nonconformist background, doesn't grant government assistance to schools with formal religious affiliations. So you tend to have a school set up by a private individual or by a local community, and then they go for a government licence. So you've got those government licence schools. Then you've got corporate schools that emerge, principally for boys. Teachers can rise and teachers can fall. Sometimes you find that it's so competitive that a private venture school is more successful than a government licensed school. And in one particular instance, there was one private venture school that was more competitive than the two behemoths, St Peter's College, which was run by the Anglican Church, and Prince Alfred College, which was run by the Methodists.
Marisa, you're at 12 minutes.
I won't be long. Okay. Sophia Jane moves around. She's principally in Kent Town. It's an elite private venture school, principally for the daughters of the elite of Adelaide. By the late 1870s, around about the time that her book is published, she has moved down to Brighton, and then she moves again to Semaphore, Lewisham Villa. Then she drops out of sight by the end of the 1870s, and I only found her again giving specialist classes in Mount Gambier for a short period of time in 1884, just before her final pregnancy and her death. Now, the shot on the top left is Kent Town, around about the time she's running Grove House. Grove House would have been slightly in behind the building on the middle left, which is Prince Alfred College, or the first part of Prince Alfred College. She then moves down to Brighton, and I've included a shot of Brighton Jetty by the sea, and then she moves across to Semaphore. The reasons for those moves, part of it might be because there were a significant number of women teachers who operated private venture schools down by the beach, because it attracted students, because it was regarded as a healthier environment. Her advertising, she works from print in the newspapers and then goes into print in book form. She's not one of the first to advertise the school, but she is one of the first, and that's an example on the left. She is one of the first to have an account of her girls' school prize ceremony printed in the paper. It's very rare for women to have that happen. It's mostly boys' schools until Sophia Jane turns up, and that other one in the bottom right-hand corner just shows the perpetual need to advertise, constantly looking for students, and her link with wax flowers, paper, needlework, painting and the like. We now get on to the book. Now, the main point of this is she's active in advertising. And one of the points that I want to bring about forth with these school textbooks is paratext is vital, because a number of these school authors of school books, MacGowan, Bonwick and co, the paratext is as vital as the book itself, for the simple reason it is promoting the author, it gives their background, it might also be promoting their teaching activities. And as Gibbs stated in his PhD, actually producing a school book in colonial Australia didn't produce much in the way of a financial reward. So why are they going to all this effort? This shot shows you that, in essence, publishing a school book, writing a school book, having it published promotes their cultural capital in the same way that promoting their cultural capital through advertising. And in the case of the bottom of these two shots, she's prepared to link it to other texts. Dr. McCulloch wrote material and ran Pictou Academy in Canada. And on the right-hand side of the page, she's noting the fact that she has some knowledge of Latin. Very rare for a lot of private girls' schools.
That's 15 minutes,
Yeah, almost at the end. Having a school book published promoted your social networks. She was always very good at that, either through her school or going to, in this instance, Governor Musgrave's wife's social activities. It promoted her social networks. The book promoted her social networks in that she made links with Rigby, who became her publisher, and she got coverage in the Christian press in Adelaide, and that maintains her links with the Protestant clergy in Adelaide, which she'd established during her school. She tried to have her book taken up by the Council of Education, which was the government board, which led into the Department of Education. The business of promoting a book, a school book, and trying to get a foothold in government bureaucracy is not uncommon amongst the men. Reverend MacGowan tried to do that unsuccessfully for him. Of course, James Bonwick became a school inspector, but for denominational schools in Victoria. However, there's one other aspect. Kirsten Mackenzie's Scandal in the Colonies notes the way in which colonists tried to use every opportunity to overcome scandal and difficulty. And certainly she, Sophia Jane Thwaites and then Mrs. Murphy, had to deal with that. There was a scandal over the sale of a school in which she fought back and promoted the fact that she'd gone about her business dealings in that failed attempt to take over a school in an honourable manner. And there were skirmishes with other female teachers in order to try and promote her turf. Her father actually intervened in that one. During the mid-1870s, she had married Charles Murphy, who was 5 years younger than her. He was an agent, becoming a newspaperman. She kept working. She kept running her school in Kent Town initially after she married. There was scandal again when one of her servants was caught stealing. She was prepared, Sophia Jane Thwaites was prepared to pursue that through the courts to, in essence, show that she was prepared to protect her reputation. And then 1875, 1876, by that point, the move takes place down towards Brighton and she's left Kent Town behind her. But there's scandal again through her brother, Walter William Thwaites Jr., who becomes involved in marital desertion and a bigamy case and a divorce case. So she's got troubles in terms of her reputation. Now, I give you fair warning with the next slide. Look away if you want to. It's a case of Memento Mori. It's not as bad as many other Memento Mori can be in terms of being distressing, but there's one final image. This is very possibly the only visual image of Sophia Jane Murphy as she was then. It's a Memento Mori. And in the year before her grammar book is published, her first daughter, Rose, dies. State Library think that this is an image taken by Sophia Jane's father of Sophia Jane with Rose in the coffin. It's one of those traditional in the sense of Victorian after death mourning photographs.
Marisa, that's 20 minutes, sorry.
Yeah, okay. So just wrapping that one up, I suspect that is the case, having seen a photograph of one of her surviving daughters. So maybe the writing of the book may have been a distraction. It might have been a way of keeping herself buoyed up in hope. Okay, in conclusion, what prompts teacher authors to write a school book? If there's negligible financial incentives, what are the other potential incentives? And we've got to look at educational history, cultural history, social history. What can be learnt from a book's paratext? And we need to look further than the book in terms of their advertising for their own teaching activities or the advertising for the book. And I'll wrap it up there and leave it open for questions. Many thanks. But I've got to get out of this, so we'll do stop share and back to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa.